We don't have in the Quran any verse that said you need to write the hadith. The hadith from Prophet Muhammad, you can find some problems.
Does this word of Prophet still hold the same authority as it was when Prophet was alive?
Doesn't mean that everything Prophet Muhammad has said, I can apply it today.
I will cook up a chain.
Yeah.
I'll cook up a hadith by the same narrators. How will you verify whether this hadith was right or not?
You will find Sayyid al-Khuwaid, he doesn't accept around 9,000 hadith from al-Kahf.
9,000 hadiths from al-Kahf.
All these muhaddithin, sometimes they narrate something rubbish. We need to put all these aside because it doesn't make sense.
Do you think that the khutbah in the National Balagha about women having the half intellect is actually sound in narration?
Not every riwaya you can find in Nahjul Balagha means that Imam Ali actually said this. We have a riwaya said al-Rushd fi khilafihim. If you want to be a good person, try to do something opposite what the Ahlul Sunnah is doing. Some Sunni scholars today, especially some Salafis, they are saying the same thing. They said, if you see something very common and between the Shia, try not to do it.
You are saying all these scholars actually we're saying that first comes identity and then comes truth.
When they found anything aligned with the Sunni views, they would say the Imam said this thing because of the Taqiyya. 95% of our ijtihad and fatawa are not certain.
All these are weak narrations. Are you saying that?
Yeah. So if the Prophet Muhammad didn't know who is the munafiq and who is the mu'min in Medina at that time, how can I believe that Imam knows everything from the beginning to the end?
Is there any hadith?
I don't rely on hadith, I rely on the Qur'an. They are focusing on jurisprudence more than any other field. Jurisprudence from the beginning till the end speaks about our body. We don't have any mas'ala in jurisprudence speaks about our soul.
The importance of hadith in the domain of Islamic sciences or in the lives of Muslims is something beyond question. Hadith and its study serves as a focal point of reference in Islamic jurisprudence, legal theory, doctrines of Islamic theology, and moral values. Despite its importance, the attention which the hadith and the study of hadith has received in the domain of Western academia has been very less. But now the trend has been changing, and we have scholars bringing in their works and changing this trend. And today I'm delighted that I have someone here, an honor to have him here, who is representing this change in the trend. It's Sheikh Haidar Hobballah. Honored to have you here. What can I say about Sheikh Haidar Hobballah? These books are already doing the talking. Sheikh Haidar Hobballah has written more than 2 dozens of books in Islamic jurisprudence, legal theory, hadith study, Islamic philosophy, and Islamic theology. Sheikh has started his journey out learning Islamic studies from Lebanon, and then they moved to home, and then they completed their PhD as well. And they are right now the head of the department in EMI in hadith studies and history, and also a lecturer in hadith studies. In Qum, I was reading the biography in the Qum, and I think in 2005, they started giving advanced lectures, which is called Baḥth al-Khārij. So I was just wondering, whenever I heard about this word, Baḥth al-Khārij or advanced classes, what is this advanced classes? What makes it different from the normal classes?
The difference between Baḥth al-Khārij and Sutuh, the level before Baḥth al-Khārij, is in Sutuh, you have a book and the teacher tried to explain the book for you. But in Baḥth al-Khārij, the teacher is free and he will give you free lectures with his opinions and more broad than As-Sutuh.
So, okay.
Yeah.
So somebody who is an expert who gives.
Yeah.
So do you feel in a sense when somebody, we generally have this notion of I attended this person's Baḥth al-Khārij. So do you need to be at some level to attain these advanced classes?
Exactly. You need to finish 2 levels before, what they called muqaddimat, then sutuh, which includes some books like al-Makasib, Shaykh al-Ansari, like Kifayat al-Usul, al-Akhund al-Khurasani, like al-Rasail, Shaykh al-Ansari, like al-Halaqat, Sayyid Muhammad Baqir al-Sabr, and some other books.
So, and the person who gives the advanced studies is considered to be an expert in the domain.
In the Hawza, they considered he must be a mujtahid to give Baḥth al-Khārij. But today, we don't have this strict
Hierarchy.
Hierarchy that you must have a paper that you are a mujtahid, then you can start Baḥth al-Khārij. It's a bit easier than before.
While I was going through your biography, so it was said that you had some notable teachers like Sayyid Muhammad al-Hashmi al-Suhrudi, Sheikh Hussain al-Najati, Sheikh Baqir al-Wani, Sheikh Wa'id al-Khurasani, and Sheikh Abdullah Jawadi Omali. All of them are really experts and brilliant scholars. So just I want to put you again on the spot. Which one was your favorite teacher among these and why?
Legal theory and jurisprudence is Sayyid Muhammad al-Hashimi, rahimahullah. I liked his, he is very organized. When he gives you the ideas, he's doing his lectures as well as organized lectures. And I like the mind that goes from A to B and from B to C properly, not goes from A to C without mentioning B.
Okay, interesting. So let's begin our inquiry into this domain of hadith. So before we begin our critical inquiry, I just wanted to ask, we have different words like sunnah, Riwāya, ʻAthar, and then in English we use traditions, reports attributed, and then we use this word hadith. Why is this word being? Is there any background to it?
Yes, I think its background started in the late 1st century Hijri and the beginning of the 2nd century. They used to describe what Prophet Muhammad said as a hadith, but they have different expressions. So, for example, when I use sunnah, sunnah has 2 meanings. The first one is what happened with Prophet Muhammad, actually, in reality. Whether I know or I don't know what happened, or what he said in reality. But I have another meaning of sunnah, what I have today in books that express, that mentioned what happened in reality at that time. So they called the first one as-sunnatul waqi'iyya, the real sunnah. And the second one as-sunnatul mahkiyya, the sunnah that explained for you what happened at that time. So this as-sunnatul mahkiyya, later they said it's hadith.
Okay.
So in this case, we have hadith and we have ʻAthar. ʻAthar is when you have something related to one of the companions or one of the tabi'een. We would call this ʻAthar. We don't say hadith from Abu Huraira. If he said something from himself, he didn't attribute anything to Prophet Muhammad. He will say, this is the ʻAthar from Abu Huraira, or this is the ʻAthar from Umar ibn al-Khattab, or Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. If he attributed something to Prophet Muhammad, you would say, this is his hadith from Prophet Muhammad. So these words has different meanings. And this hadith sciences has a lot of terms and expressions that the students sometimes feel tired to understand and to collect all these terms and expressions in the science of hadith. So this is one of the problems that we have already.
So it's not just my problem, the problem.
No.
Because sometimes I'm like, some people are saying it's riwāya and sometimes it's hadith. So I was like, is there something specific in the meaning of hadith that this word has attained this status?
Let me mention something. Ahlus Sunnah, they use the word hadith more than Shia.
Okay.
Shia usually they use word riwaya more than hadith. So for example, they said في الرواية عن الإمام الباقر. But Ahlul Sunnah, they usually say in the hadith of Prophet Muhammad, he said one word.
What do you think is the reason for this?
I don't know. Maybe because Ahlul Sunnah, they are more strict about using these terms in Ilm al-Hadith.
Yes. Okay.
If you use a word hadith in different meanings, they would say you are not a very good student in hadith.
You know, we have on these lines, in the Quran, there is this injunction that we are protecting this word and this has to be recorded and inscribed. But I'm just thinking that, you know, we have so many volumes of hadith written. Was there any in Quran or injunction that you have to record what Prophet said and then you have to preserve them, these hadiths and all? Or is it just that Muslims themselves burden them from this taklif? Was there any, because in the Quran we never see that, okay, record Prophet's hadiths and make a book out of it. Why do you think, how was this tradition of recording and inscribing these texts? What was the reason behind it, if there is?
You are right. We don't have in the Quran any verse that said you need to write the hadith. But at the same time, we don't have any verse of the Quran said you need to write the Quran.
Okay.
That's the same. What happened in the early time, Arab culture, it's a oral culture. They didn't use the pencil or the pen to save their history. So they usually tell the next generation what happened before, and the next generation will tell the next generation what happened before. So they had oral culture. So because of this, you can't find in the first century, just a few times, you can't find the hadith has been written. Why? Because they used what they used to do in transmission. So after that, when they found that we have a lot of problems in hadith, so they realized we need to put everything
in the writing.
So that happened in the beginning of the 2nd century, in the late 1st century. They realized the problems with oral culture using in hadith. So for the Quran, even if we have such a thing in the Quran that we have 3, 4, 5 copies of the Quran, but we didn't have at that time 100 copies of the Quran, just 3 or 4. The majority of Muslims, they know the Quran from their memory.
Mm-hmm.
They just try to take the Quran from the Qur'an and to do hifz for the Quran, then try to transmit the Quran to the next generation with this way. These books that we had at that time, just one in Al-Kufa, one in Al-Madinah, one in Mecca, one in Egypt, one in Sham. That's it. So we didn't have that culture that we need to write everything to protect it.
But even like as you mentioned that this was an oral culture, but Muslims still need to know the word of God in that sense. So the conditions are not like God is speaking, it's Prophet speaking to someone like you, for example, to his wife or to the disciples and all. So if you restrict to the recording of the Quran, it minimizes the religion. But hadith, if the reports, like we have voluminous book, it also increases the takhlif. So was it necessary to record these things so that to burden or like normal Muslims, not just with the injunctions there, but also contradictory reports and all these things? Was there any something in the Islamic doctrines that asked them to know, you have to record this because there's going to be a tradition there?
They started from the verse in the Quran said, أطيعوا الله وأطيعوا الرسول. ما آتاكم الرسول فخذوه وما نهاكم عنه فانتهوا. So that means you should obey Prophet and you should take everything Prophet gives you. So this is the main idea that Qur'an mentioned in its verses. So in this case, they said, I need to know what Prophet Muhammad said because it's wajib to obey Prophet Muhammad. How can I know what he said exactly? So I need to know. In the beginning, they used to use the oral culture to know what Prophet Muhammad said in order to obey him. But later, they stopped to write. So that was so the Quran didn't mention writing, didn't mention recording, but he mentioned the authority of the Prophet, the authority of what he says.
With the authority of the Prophet or the word of the Prophet, because at that time, Prophet was alive, so obeying Prophet makes sense. But right now in this world, or after 200 years, the Atiullah, Atiur Rasul, it changes because now the Prophet is not there for the interaction. And now, does this word of Prophet still hold the same authority as it was when Prophet was alive?
In general, yes, but it doesn't mean that everything Prophet Muhammad has said, I can apply it today. Because some of the Hadith is contextual.
Okay.
So it's related to that time, not to every time. And not just in Hadith. Maybe you will not agree with me, but I believe that even the Quran, some of the verses is contextual. So, for example, a woman came to Prophet Muhammad. She had a problem with her husband. Then Prophet Muhammad said, I don't know the answer. Then the Quran said, this is the solution. So this is something very small happened at that time, and he mentioned this in the Quran. Even in the Quran mentioned, if you go to some place and there are 10 people in that room, you need to give that man a place to sit. Even this small thing you can find in the Quran. So I can't say the Quran has a general principles or just a general principle. Sometimes you can find general principles in the Quran, like awfu bil uqud, and sometimes you have very small thing happened at exact time, and the Quran said this is the solution, or this is the hukmullah in this case. The same thing we have in a hadith from Prophet Muhammad. Some of the ahadith gives us general principles, and some other you can find just,
as you said, sometimes general and sometimes specific. It's because we have this whole tradition of recording the Quran and other things because it's just as one book, but in hadith. So right now, even if something happens in my neighborhood, and if the news comes in, I'll still be like, okay, maybe it's a fake news. I won't trust it. Even sometimes in my building, when a fire alarm goes on, I'm like, okay, maybe it's a false fire. I'm not saying that you should do it, but sometimes there's a tendency to trust. And now you have volumes of books, not like one or two, it's volumes of books from 1400 years back, seeing all those geography, all those empires and everything. And then how would somebody, how are you so sure that actually Prophet said these things? So how is it done if the hadith studies? How is that? Because you also have mentioned, I just want to, through fundamental research in this field, is that hadith cannot be considered a hujjah nor mu'tabar unless it reaches the point of yaqeen. Given this whole journey, how can the heart come to yaqeen that this? How is it done?
First of all, when we say we need a yaqeen, it doesn't mean that I can have a certainty in all these volumes. When I say I need a certainty, that means I can trust just 5% of this hadith, not every hadith. This is the first thing. The second thing, the definition of certainty in history is different from the definition of certainty in mathematics, for example. In history, what we say yaqeen or certainty, it means high probability. It's 90%, 95%. It's very rare. It doesn't happen. Or it didn't happen. So that's the meaning of the yaqeen. For the historian, the certainty doesn't mean 100%. And I can put my hand on the Qur'an and 2%, for example. It means it's something 90%, 95%, 98%. Why? Because I found this hadith in different books, different sources, in different books from different madhahib, from different sects. And I found this hadith at the early time, and then later. And this hadith has no problem with the Quran. And this hadith, reasonable. There's no contradictory between the hadith or inside this hadith. I put all these things together, then I could say the probability of the reliability of this hadith is very high. So I can rely on this hadith. This is the meaning of certainty in history and hadith.
How is it done though? Like in history, you have different parameters. In terms of these hadiths, these reports being, I don't know how many how is it done? How do you know that, okay, the probability is higher or lower? And in which department of studies it's done?
Yes, this is a very long process. So you need to start from the sources, the reliability of the sources. For example, the book Al-Kafi from a sheikh, authored by a Sheikh Muhammad bin Yaqub al-Kulayni, or a book Al-Jami' al-Sahih, al-Bukhari. These books I can consider as a very high sources. But if I go to the book Makarim al-Akhlaq, Sheikh al-Tabrasi, or I go to the book like Al-Ikhtisas, his books, low.
Why?
Why? Because you can find the method of the author, and you will find that the author is very strict, as he couldn't accept any hadith just with 1, 2, 3, 4 conditions. I will give you an example. What is the difference in the method between Al-Bukhari and Muslim? One difference. The difference is that Al-Bukhari said, I cannot accept any isnad just in one case. If I have Zayd and Zayd said, Qala Amr, I can't accept what Zayd said. Even if all the ulama said he is reliable, he is a thiqa, I can't accept just with 2 conditions. The first, I need to prove that Zayd lived at the same time that Amr lived. The second, I need to prove that Zayd has met Amr.
Okay.
But Muslims said, no, it's okay if they lived at the same time. I don't need to prove that he actually met him at meeting. So when you go through the book, you will find the method of the muhaddis. And you will find that some of the muhaddithin are very, very, very strict. And some of them, they don't care about all these conditions. In this case, you will put the books of hadith in a category. You will say, this is the first level, this is the second level, this is the third level. And the reliability of the first level is more than the third level. So this is about the sources. Second, about the narrators. So here, the Muslim start to create a new knowledge or new science called ilm al-Rijāl. So they tried a lot to find any information about all the narrators.
Is it possible actually?
Yeah, it's possible because we have, I would say, thousands of volumes in the history. We don't have just 1, 2 books. For example, we have a book called Tahdhīb al-Kamal. The author is al-Mazdi. So this book is 30 5 volumes speaks about more than 10,000 narrators. Everything, he collected everything in history here and there in any books about this man, about his name, his father's name, from which tribe, his politics, views, everything. He tried to collect all these things. Then you can decide.
But that would have happened, so as you said, in the beginning it was oral culture, and then it was a written culture.
Yeah.
So at the time when these hadiths were reported, these people, it was oral tradition. So all this history and everything was recorded much later on. So there is still that gap of reliability. So how are you so sure that you have actually the data about the narrators? Maybe these things are cooked up.
This problem, Ahlul Sunnah, they have this problem more than Shi'a.
Why?
Because Shi'a, they rely on hadith from Imam Baqir and Imam Sadiq. And at the time of Imam Baqir and Imam Sadiq and Imam Kadhim and Imam Rida, they started writing. But yes, the hadith from Prophet Muhammad, you can find some problems. Ahlul Sunnah, one of the solutions that Ahlul Sunnah made here, they said all the companions are adil, are reliable, and the Qur'an said they are okay. So in this case, this gap, they solved the whole gap.
Yeah. But imagine, for example, I am someone who has studied what you said, al-Rijāl, is the study of the narrators. I know who are trustworthy. And then there is the hadith. I also know how a prophet talks. I can make a matan, hadith, and give said, I heard from this. How will you verify it? That I will cook up a chain.
Yeah.
I'll cook up a hadith. By the same narrators. How will you verify whether this hadith was right or not?
So I didn't heard this hadith from these narrators. I heard this hadith from you.
I'll write it in some book. I'll say, there's this old book. I found this book.
Ahsan. If you find any book in the bazaar, in the bookstore, in this case, they will not accept the riwaya. They call this wijada.
Mm-hmm. What's that?
Wijada means I didn't heard the riwayat from my shaykh, from my teacher, and he heard these riwayat from his teacher, and he heard this riwayat from his teacher. I just found a book in a bookstore, and I've realized that this book has many riwayats. In this case, the ulama would say this book is not reliable, because how can I prove that this book came from someone who is scholar in hadith? So in many of books, especially in the Safavid time, many of books that we have today is wijad.
Okay.
And because of this, some scholars, they don't accept all these books, like Sheikh Asif Muhsin, for example. Some of these books, as Sayyid al-Khou'i, he doesn't accept. Why? Because we just found a copy of this book in 10th century at the Safavid period.
Okay.
How can I know that this book is a real book that the author in the 3rd century have written this book?
Okay, so it's in the sense that the sources, they have to be at a certain period of time.
Yes.
For them to be authentic. And then it comes to the narrators. And these sources are the Kutub al-Arbaʿa.
No, not just Kutub al-Arbaʿa. We have more than Kutub al-Arbaʿa, like the books that Sheikh al-Saduq has authored. He was the author of some books.
So how do you decide which one will be a source and which one won't be a source?
From the methods of the muhaddith, from the, what can I say?
How do you know when someone is a muhaddith or not?
So, for example, if I go to a book, Makarim al-Akhlaq, Shukh al-Tabrasi, I will find the muhaddith, he doesn't care about the isnad.
Okay.
He doesn't care about the sources from where he took all these hadith. I would say Shaykh al-Tabrasi, the author of a book, Makarim al-Akhlaq, is not very real muhaddith. But if I go to Tahdhib al-Ahkam, authored by Sheikh Tusi, I would say he is very strict, because he mentioned all the asanid and he mentioned the differences between the ahadith and even the words. He said, I found this hadith with this word in some places and with this word in another places placed. So that means he is very serious about his sources, very serious about the copies of the source, because we have different copies.
But he can still be selective. I'll tell you why. For example, right now, if this is a science and properly done, so but still the Sunnis don't quote from if they are like, okay, in this muhaddith is a serious one, he actually looks at it. But the Sunni only looked at towards the Sunni muhaddisun and the Shi'i, like the Shaykh Tusi. So still, it doubts their sincerity, that they are a bit biased towards their theology.
I totally agree with you. Because of this, I don't believe that the Shi'i can just go to the Shi'i sources in Hadith. We need to put on a desk all the Islamic sources in Hadith together. I need to put Sahih al-Bukhari here, and Kafi al-Kulayni here, and Tahzib al-Ahkam here, and Sunan ibn Majah here. I need to put all these sources from different sets. Ibadi, Sunni, Shi'i, Zaydi, Imami, Zaydi, and then I can compare. You will find something very strange. You will find that we have hundreds or more, maybe thousands of the hadith similar in all sects. But because we just focusing on our sources in hadith, we thought that just Shi'a have this hadith, and the Sunni they don't have these hadith. But you will find no, they have their asanid to the same riwayah that we have.
So how much is the similarity?
More than 40%.
More than 40%.
Yes, this is my experience. More than 40% at least. You will find even in fiqh, even in very detailed in sharia, in fiqh, in ibadat, in muamalat, in all these topics, even in morality, in history, you will find similarity is very high.
Interesting. Because, yeah, this was, again, this was another, that thing was bothering me while I was looking at it. So one is this, the theological bias, and then I was learning about, there is not like the Shia Sunni, there is also the theological bias. For example, the Qummi and the Baghdadi scholar, they selecting their words. So how has it impacted the whole genre of hadith? And what is this Qummi and Baghdadi circle, if you can tell our viewers also about it?
So we have in the Shia history, the Shia hadith history, 3 schools till the end of the 5th century after Hijrah. The first one is the Kufa school, which you can say the foundation of Shi'i hadith was in Kufa. Then, in the beginning of the 3rd century, the majority of scholars, now you will find them in Qum, in Iran. Then, in the beginning of the 4th century, the late 4th century and the beginning of 5th century, the Hawza, now you'll find in Baghdad. So what happened? A lot of reasons what happened. So like today, we had Najaf, then something happened in politics and something else that the Hawza, now you can find in Qum. Then you will find another Hawza in another place. So the difference between Kufa and Qum, the Kufa, they didn't care about the matnul hadith, the text itself.
Okay, the text.
So you can find any kind of hadith there. It's what we called in Arabic kashkul. Everything. Haqqun and batil. But in Qum school, no. They said we need to take it more serious and to critique the hadith that we found in the heritage of Kufa school. So then they started to critique the hadith, compare the hadith with the Qur'an, compare the hadith with the reason, compare the hadith with other hadith.
This started in Qum.
Yes, they were
in which time period?
Exactly between 200, 220 till 300 after Hijrah. So at that time, we had very a famous scholar in Qom called Ahmad ibn Muhammad ibn Isa al-Ash'ari. He tried to solve the problems that he found in Hadith. And he was very strict. Sometimes, if he found a rawi or a narrator in Qom who narrated the Hadith without any serious criteria, he will kick him out. And that happened because he had a relationship with the ruler in Rai, and he can kick him out. And that happened with Sahl ibn Ziyad al-Adami and al-Sayrafi and other scholars at that time. So the Qum school more strict than Kufa school. And when we go to Baghdad, you will find they became more Mu'tazili, because Baghdad at that time was the capital of the Mu'tazila. Baghdad and Basra was the capital of the Mu'tazila in the 4th century, 3rd and 4th century. So, and they had relationship with the Mu'tazila.
Oh, so they were more rational hadiths.
So now became more rational. And you can find Sayyid al-Murtada, who passed away in 436. You can find Sayyid al-Murtada critique harshly the Matan al-Hadith, the text itself. You said all these muhaddithin, sometimes they narrate something rubbish. We need to put all these aside because it doesn't make sense.
The narrators in Al-Kafi and Mandala Yazur Faqih,
even in Al-Kafi, because Sayyid al-Murtada, even he mentioned Al-Kulayni himself, he said sometimes he narrates something unreasonable. I can't understand this. So, for example, he said, if we have a watermelon, we have a hadith. If the watermelon is very good, that means it is Shi'i. And if the watermelon isn't good, that means it is Umayyi. And Sayyid Murtada said, as I remember, said, what's this? The watermelon, the reason is
because the soil.
Ahsant. Yeah. So he said, so I can't accept this hadith, even if I found this hadith in Al-Kanaf.
Interesting. Also, you know, these, even when I was reading Rakatullah Khui is also very critical of some of the hadiths, they say, even many of the books. But after so much of even the progress in al-Rijāl, like these scholars, but still, for example, in our houses in domain of Islamic jurisprudence, we don't have Tawzul Masail or Istiftā of al-Mahilli. We have all the recent scholars. But when it comes to hadith, even despite this, all these criticisms, everything is being done, it still doesn't look like a ijtihadi school. It looks more like a taqlidi school, because even in our houses, we still have al-Kafi, we still have Bihar al-Anwar. Like this, it hasn't made an impact on the ground, despite them being so critical or Qumi school. Among the masses, we are still quoting for al-Kafi. Why has this been the trend?
I think this is the gap between the scholars and people.
Why has this gap been there, if you have been so serious about your discourse?
My opinion, because they don't care about anything in religion isn't fiqh. They are very serious about everything related to jurisprudence. But they don't care that much if you believe in a hadith about history, about theology, about anything else.
But these hadiths form the basis of all these things.
This is the idea. Because of this, they if you ask them, they will say, what's the problem? People believe in this and that. There's no problem in this. But they need to do what the fiqh and jurisprudence
is doing in there.
Yeah. And so they are focusing on jurisprudence more than any other field.
And this can have a lot of impact and difference.
I agree with you. Because of this, some scholars like Sheikh Muhammad Baqir al-Bahbudi, if you heard about him, he tried to put aside all the narrations that he doesn't accept in Al-Kafi. And from 8 volumes, he created 3 volumes called Sahih al-Kafi. And he tried to critique the isnad and the text. And for that, he said, I just accept 2,000 or 3,000 hadith from al-Kafi, or 4,000 hadith from al-Kafi, from 16,000 hadith. And this book, Sahih al-Kafi, should be the book in Shia houses.
Mhm.
They need to read this book, not al-Kafi. Because in al-Kafi, you can find something good, something not good. But in this book, you will give people the actual hadith and the Sahih al-Hadith. There is no problem in isnad or in the text itself. But they didn't accept.
Why?
From it. He had a lot of problems in Iran because what he did with Sahih al-Kafi. They didn't accept that. They said, what you did is something against al-Kafi. And we need to protect al-Kafi, not to critique al-Kafi, because al-Kafi is the very important hadith book in Shia history. And I think the problem is the identity. Always we are afraid about our identity. And we think that we need to protect our identity. And with these ways, we can protect our identity. If we start critiquing a lot, maybe there is some problems that we can lose our identity in future. That's their mindset.
How do you feel about that?
So I don't agree with that at all. I critiqued all these ideas in my books. I said, no, there's no problem in that. If we have fake identity, we need to put it aside.
Mm-hmm. Because sometimes you feel, what is the purpose of this, all this critique and everything, when in our houses we still have the same books and the same hadiths going on?
Maybe we need time, our generations, to change this situation.
Hopefully, inshallah, maybe. So coming back to this, also the notion of biases in the Shia hadith. So while I was reading some of the work, they said the vast majority of Shia hadiths are actually not derived from Prophet Muhammad, but are based on the question asked to the Imams per se. And even in the books in Mullah Azul Faqih, 60% of the hadiths they says to Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq and 15% Imam Baqir, and then Prophet Muhammad 7% and Imam Ali 5%. So while I was reading this, I was a bit shocked that the hadith has a Utiullah wa Uti Rasul, but then it's mostly among the Imams. I'll say, how do you look at, but you have also studied the Sunni hadith, and then this shift in the theology, how does it impact the hadith per se? And this centralization of these Imams?
Because Shia believe that the Imam has the same authority that Prophet has. And there's no difference between Imam and Prophet Muhammad in explaining the real religion. Because of this, when they found Imam Sadiq at their time, they can ask him directly why they need to have isnad to Prophet Muhammad to take his hadith, because the hadith of Imam Sadiq is the same of hadith of Prophet Muhammad. So the reason here is theology. Because they believe that the imama means something similar with the prophecy. I don't say it's the same, but the authority of the imama is the same of the prophecy. So in this case, they didn't find any need to try to find the asanid Prophet Muhammad. They can go directly to Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq. And because at that time, Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq and Imam Musa al-Kadhim and Imam al-Baqir, they had this culture, that writing, so they started taking their religion from Imam Muhammad al-Baqir and from Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq. This is the first thing. So their first reason is theologicalism. The second thing, if you go before Imam Muhammad al-Baqir, we have some narrations, even in the Shi'i books, that before Imam Muhammad al-Baqir, the majority of the Shia, they didn't care about knowing jurisprudence, theology, history, tafsir al-Qur'an, all these things. Because maybe they were busy with politics, especially after Imam Hussein, and before that, the problems between Imam Ali and Muawiyah. And we have in our narration that Imam Muhammad al-Baqir was the first Imam who learned the Shia. How can they do Salat?
Okay.
Yeah, we have this in history. So I think because of this, because of what Imam Muhammad al-Baqir did with the Shia, they found that the authority, the marji'iyya for them is Imam Muhammad al-Baqir. So there's no need to go to Prophet Muhammad. If I have another Prophet Muhammad with different meanings, and I'm in my time.
This notion is also questioned because, some of, they say that even if these Imams like Muhammad Baqir and this, some of the Sunni scholars say that actually, even if it's not Imams, it's the major narrators are from Kufa. They are saying it's Imam, but it's actually Zurara, Abu Basir, Ishamayn, Ibn Urwa, and Ibn Hakam. So, and even Imams have said that these are liars. So this whole tradition of these, about the Zurara and Abu Basir, some of the Sunni scholars say that. So this whole notion of Shia Hadith is based on, it's actually not from Imams, it's actually from these Kufa guys. And even their credibility is at stake. So how would you respond to this charge?
No. We have some of these narrators that there is some questions about them. But many of these narrators, we don't have such thing. For example, Muhammad ibn Muslim. You don't have such a thing. This is out what can I say? If you have a very small problem, you make it very big problem to destroy the whole building. I think there is a problem. I agree. There is a problem with some scholars and some famous scholars that we have some criticisms.
What do you mean by some scholars?
Like Sahl ibn Ziyad al-Adami. Even Zurara, we have debates about Zurara because we have many narrations, praise Zurara, many narrations.
Then we have major sources from, like major narrations from Zurara himself.
Not from Zurara himself. We have many narrations from many scholars that we don't have such a thing with them. So because of this, Sayyid al-Khou'i, because he took all these problems, many of these problems seriously, you will find Sayyid al-Khou'i, he doesn't accept around 9,000 hadith from Al-Kahf.
9,000 hadiths from Al-Kahf.
Al-Khou'i believes in around 6,000 hadith in Al-Kahf or more. So that's
more than 50% of the Al-Kahfi.
Yeah. Exactly.
So sometimes we have these contradictory reports from the Imams in itself, about Imams as well. So for example, I was reading one of the hadiths in Al-Kahfi. They said that Imam Al-Baqir used to love meat. He was he used to save some money just for the meat. And then I was reading in another hadith about Imam Muhammad Baqir and Imam Zain al-Abidin, that they had a divorce and they were their heart was broken after that divorce. So on one notion you have this notion of these Imams from Al-Kahfi, and on the other side you have the other notion that they have these divine attributes, they were born before, like they have this ilm al-Ghayb, they have all these knowledges, they are not normal human beings, they are divine settled insan al-Kamil. So then again in this notion, because hadiths are from Imams and they have, but again then you have this notion which is contradicting itself. How do you look at this in your own discourse?
So about these topics, we need to speak about every topic of these topics separately. So for example, I don't believe that Ahlul Bayt, they know unseen.
Is there any hadith?
I don't rely on hadith. I rely on the Qur'an, because Qur'an said very clearly, in my opinion, that even Prophet Muhammad, he didn't say some of the munafiqeen, they used to live with him in Medina. وممن حولكم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وممن حولكم من الأعراب منافقون ومن أهل المدينة مرضوا على النفاق لا تعلمهم نحن نعلم. You don't know the munafiqeen. They live in Medina. نحن نعلمهم. God knows them. So if the Prophet Muhammad didn't know who is the munafiq and who is the mu'min in Medina at that time, how can I believe that Imam knows everything from the beginning to the end. In this case, I would compare the Hadith with the Qur'an. If I found the Qur'an that all the prophets and Prophet Muhammad, they didn't know al-Ghayb, so I would say these hadith from al-Ghulat, or at least I can put question mark on all these hadith. I would say I can't accept. I will not say, I will not reject all these hadith. I can't accept.
But what do you mean by Ghulat here?
Ghulat means the group in Shia society in the 2nd century, a bit earlier, I think, with the Kaysaniya sect at that time. The group in Al-Kufa, they tried to explain the imamah something similar to, I would not say the imam is God, is kind of God, maybe, or the imam is a prophet. So that they called them al-Ghulat, because they believe that the imam is something, not what we believe today, because they believe the imam can create everything. God create everything, and he gave the word to the imam to do whatever he wants to do, and these things. And they believe in many ideas like at-tanasukh. They believe that the soul of Imam Ali, when he passed away, came inside Imam al-Hasan, and then the same soul came inside Imam al-Hussein, and all these 12 imams, they are the same person. So these groups in Al-Kufa, they are very active at that time. And that's what Qom school tried to reteach all the hadith that maybe the Ghulat tried to create in the 2nd century.
You said that this is the realization evolved to the extent that Allama al-Mamakani has noted that some of what was considered as exaggeration of ghulu among the classical scholar is considered among the necessities of the sect today. Do you think the ghulu is still there among us?
I believe we have type of ghulu today. I don't mean ghulu that's something equal with kufr, blasphemy, but I would say the level of ghulu will still have this level of ghulu when we believe the imam is something like God. We have more, we have al-Wilayah Takwiniyya. What does that mean? It means that God, then everything, and between God and all the worlds, there is Imam. And the Imam, he created everything. He took the power from God and he created all the world, and now he is managing everything. The sun, the moon, and everything. This is the Wilayah Takwiniyya.
There is nothing in the Quran that said that this is not possible.
Why?
Is there any hadith? So for example, so
for example,
the Quran doesn't say, oh Prophet, you don't have ilm al-Ghayb. But the Quran is just silent on it. So there is a possibility Prophet might have ilm al-Ghayb.
No, I told you now, the Quran said that the Prophet doesn't know the munafiqeen. And the Quran, the verse in the Quran, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَلَا أَقُولُ لَكُمْ إِنِّي أَعْلَمُ الْغَيْبِ. I don't say to you that I know the Ghayb. Another verse is, وَلَوْ كُنْتُ أَعْلَى, another verse, وَلَوْ كُنْتُ أَعْلَمُ الْغَيْبَ لَاسْتَكْثَرْتُ مِنَ الْخَيْرِ. I don't know the Ghayb. If I know the Ghayb, I can have millions and everything I want. So that, in my opinion, the Quran is very clear that the prophets, they didn't know al-Ghayb. Yes, they know something about al-Ghayb, like the stories of the prophets before them. So this something about al-Ghayb. They can't know what happened before, but God told them. So they know some of al-Ghayb, but in the idea of the Shia today, they believe that al-Imam knows everything from the beginning till the end.
But that is only about the Prophet in the Quran, not about the Imams.
Because Shia believe that Prophet Muhammad is, if any one of the A'imma has anything, Prophet Muhammad has the same thing and more.
Do you think there is a hadith to back this?
No, not hadith. Because not one hadith, many hadith that mention this idea.
Which sounds sanad and sound.
Yeah, and they believe and they accept all these hadith. They said, okay, I can't say that Prophet Muhammad is less than the Imam. He is more than the Imam.
But what I'm saying is that this changes the whole notion, the way we look at hadith. Because the authority in the Imam is also because of their divine status. So, is there any hadith per se which denies these claims of divine by the Imams per se? Or are you saying that all those hadiths on Ibn Khurayza, Imam Jafar, I know what is in the hell and the heaven, all these are weak narrations? Are you saying that?
Yeah. Look, there is a book from, I think, Sheikh Muhammad Hassan Muzaffar called Ilm al-Imam. If you go to this book or many other books, you will find even the ahadith that speak about Ilm al-Imam bil-Ghayb has contradictory inside all these ahadith together, because we have 7 groups of ahadith. One group said Imam knows everything. Another group said of the Riwāya. Another group of the Riwāya said if he wants, he will know. The third one, if he wants, he will ask God, and God he will teach him. The fourth one, no, he doesn't know the Ghayb. So inside the hadith we have a problem. And we have another problem with the Qur'an. In this case, I would not say that the Imam can know everything. Yes, something from al-Ghayb he knows definitely, but not everything. But in this case, it doesn't mean I try to take everything from Ahl al-Bayt to make them just scholars. No, I don't say that. Mm-hmm. I said that the interpretation of the Quran and the prophetic Sunnah, the best interpretation you can find among the Imams. So, because they are the most knowledgeable people related to religion in this ummah. Mm-hmm. So that's, I can accept that. That's no problem with me. But I can't accept that they know everything even without religion. This is the problem and contradictory with the Quran.
So do you think that the Imam in itself was doing ijtihad? Or was the Imam, because this is also one of the things that they said that Imam has knowledge from the birth of the religion. But what you are saying is standing that Imam in itself is a mujtahid because it's his own particular reasoning.
If I say he can read the Quran and he can understand the Quran correctly
through his own efforts,
if you want to call this ijtihad, that's no problem. But I can say he is the infallible source for me to interpret the Quran and Sunnah.
How do you know he's infallible?
Because from Ḥadīth الثقلين, for example. إني تارك فيكم الثقلين وإنهما لا يفترقان. No separate.
But that's not about the 12 Imams. That is about how you can extend it to the Sadat still.
Yeah, no problem. That's you have to put several groups of ahadith together to take the result. So al-Ghadir and Hadith Ithna Ashar and all these hadith together to make the whole theory. You can't go to one group of the hadith to make the whole theory. You need to put different groups together, then you can go to your result.
Is because also about the infallibility is also related to Isla-Ashari, but then in all those things we have hadith from Ismailis, from Waqfis as well. So the impact of their theology as well. So how are you sure what you are interpreting is not because of your own theological biases?
No, it's not biases. It's going to the hadith itself. So if I go to the prophetic Sunnah and then I go to the Sunnah from Imam Ali and Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein, I will find that the interpretation, I don't say everything, the interpretation of the Quran and the prophetic Sunnah from Ahlul Bayt salamullahi ta'ala alayhim is a source for me to understand my religion.
But you said about infallibility. Quran doesn't even talk about Prophet's infallibility.
The Quran speaks about Prophet infallibility in tabligh al-din.
In tabligh al-din, or
In interpretation.
in interpretation of the Quran.
I don't say everything now.
Okay.
I'm just speaking about the interpretation of Quran and Sunnah. So something related to tabligh al-din.
So on another thing on these things, the other charge is of taqiyya. I was reading something among your work and that also interested me. You can explain. You said that in the domain of taqiyya, instead of presenting al-Baḥth as men who are always afraid of every reaction that others perpetuate against them, we must present them as men who speak the truth and do not fear for God the blame of the blamer, as is the manner of the prophets and the path of the saints of the noble Quran. And you also raised a really interesting point that you are saying that Imam was doing taqiyya, but Abu Hanifa was himself in the jail. So if opposing Abu Hanifa would have resulted in his imprisonment, the guy was himself. So how do you notion, because this notion of taqiyya is really widely up for justifying many hadiths. How do you view it in line of what you have written?
I don't believe using taqiyya in any case. Taqiyya is just in some cases that it's very dangerous, very serious. You don't have another way to solve the problem or to protect yourself and your group and your followers. For example, if someone came to the Imam and asked him, what is your opinion about al-Khalifa al-Abbasi? I would say, in this case, that's okay if the Imam said something taqiyya. He said, al-Khalifa al-Abbasi is a good person, because it's reasonable. But if someone came to the Imam and asked him, can I do wudu in this way or that way? And the Imam said, yes, you can do it. And I say, this is taqiyya, because some Sunni scholars at that time, they believe in this. And he is using taqiyya because of them. It doesn't make sense, because at that time, we have dozens of views in everything in jurisprudence, between Muslims, even between Ahl Sunnah. It doesn't make sense to use taqiyya here in this case. Using taqiyya from whom? What is the problem? If he said something against some scholars, some Sunni scholars, what could happen? There's no meaning for that. Yes, in some cases, I can accept that the Imam can say something because of taqiyya, but it's very few cases. But the scholars, unfortunately, they're using taqiyya a lot. When they found anything aligned with the Sunni views, they would say the Imam said this thing because of the taqiyya.
Especially in usul al-fiqh, we have many.
In usul al-fiqh, in history, and some of them today, they try to say, if they found some views from Shaykh al-Mufid, not from the Imam, that I can't accept it today as a Shi'i, I believe in what the majority believe, for example. They said, even Shaykh al-Mufid, he used the taqiyya in this case. So if Shaykh al-Mufid said, I don't believe in al-Wilayah takwiliyya, they would say, Shaykh al-Mufid is using a taqiyya here. So in this case, yes, I can't rely on anything, not just for imams and all the Shia scholars, because maybe they say they are saying something they don't believe in. That's the point.
That point is well understood, but why are the other scholars not taking? Why do you think? Is it because to maintain the identity they are using the taqiyya as a tool?
That's one of the reasons, because we have a Riwāya. Yeah, it's not a very strong Riwāya. It's isnad, but we have a Riwāya said الرشد في خلافهم. If you want to be a good person, try to do something opposite what Ahl Sunnah is doing. So to separate yourself from them. So maybe this idea encouraged them to take all the hadith that separate them from Ahl Sunnah. I said maybe.
But I actually was using you have said something similar in one of your works. You said, I criticized the idea of wisdom in their disagreement and concluded that no narration for adopting that which disagrees with the Sunni was authentic by its chain. Even the narrations of al-Rawandi that was authenticated by Sayyid al-Sadr, in addition to the number of these narrations being very few. So is it hinting towards something similar?
Yeah.
So you're saying that, in many, in the tasbih we do, it's the order of the way is different from the Sunni. So it's because the disagreement with us. So what is right, it should differ from them. So, but you are saying that there was no authentic chain.
Yeah, that's my opinion. And unfortunately, some Sunni scholars today, especially some Salafis, they are saying the same thing. They said, if you see something very common and between the Shia, try not to do it.
They're learning from us, you are saying?
Yeah, but they say, I don't know, but this is the idea of protect your identity and make yourself different from others.
So protect your identity at the behest of truth, you're saying?
Maybe some of these fuqaha, they accept this hadith or this narration. Because of this, they try to use it as much as they can.
You are questioning the intentions of this. So imagine, so I have a duty first towards the truth and then towards my identity. You are saying all these scholars actually we're saying that first comes identity and then comes truth.
No, when I say identity, I try to think sociologically. But when I say maybe they relied on this hadith, I try to speak with the usul al-fiqh or jurisprudence way.
There's another of my charges that, so this is, I think Al-Mahdi will also take it personally, where it is because we have produced this work. In one of your works, you say that third-class sources such as Tafsir al-Ayashi, and Tafsir al-Ayashi is one of the earliest surviving commentaries from the phase of Imami Shias, and you said it includes 2 mursal narrations from 10 narrations with no chain. Why are you calling such an important work as third class?
Because if you go to Tafsir al-Ayashi from the beginning to the end, you will not find from where al-Ayashi took all these ahadith. No sources, no asani, no chains.
And what is in your knowledge is also in knowledge of many other ulama. But why are they still using
even Sayyid al-Khuwi, he believes in the same. If Sayyid al-Khuwi finds a riwaya in Tafsir al-Ayashi, he will say it's mursal. I can't accept it. Many scholars today, they don't accept the riwayat from Tafsir al-Ayashi unless if they can't find the same riwaya in different places with isnad or with some qara'in.
For your personal thing, you will never use Tafsir al-Ayashi.
My personal thing, Tafsir al-Ayashi is the third of the sources, and I can use it with another source, other source.
But there is no hadith against buying Tafsir al-Ayashi. No, so you can still buy it. But also when I was telling some of my friends that I'm gonna you will be here as a guest, they were ask him about Khabar Wāḥid, because his opinion about Khabar Wāḥid is the epistemic reliability. Can you just give us what is Khabar Wāḥid and why are you so much serious about its epistemic reliability?
Khabar Wāḥid, the majority of Ahlul Sunnah from the beginning till now, and the majority of the Shia scholars from Al-Allama al-Hilli till now, they believe in the authority of Khabar al-Wāḥid.
What's Khabar al-Wāḥid, just for him?
And Khabar al-Wāḥid is the narration, any narration, 1 or 2 or 3 narrations, or 3 chains, that gives you 70%, 80%, but it can't give you the certainty. So any narration that not give you certainty means Khabar Wāḥid.
So Khabar Wāḥid is a narration which doesn't give you certainty.
Yeah.
And the majority of the narrations we have are Khabar Wāḥid.
Yeah, the majority.
So, and they are also used in fiqh and everything. So we are using the sources which are not certain. Wow. That's strange.
And that's no problem, because they said, Sayyid Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr in his book, as I remember, Iqtisaduna, he mentioned that 95% of our ijtihad and fatawa are not certain with this meaning, but it is hujjah. This is the difference. For example, if you are a judge and someone came and said to you that this person is guilty, and this witness is okay, no problem. You will say he is guilty, but you don't have certainty. They said in our life, we have many cases that we don't have certainty. At the same time, our dhann, high probability, is hujjah, has authority.
But it also affects the hujjah and khatar. Mostly, zan can't have. So for it's something authoritative, hujjah, it has to have khat. For zan can't lead to khat.
They said, I have certainty that God gives hujjiyya, authority, to a Khabar Wāḥid that doesn't give me certainty. This is the process in Usul al-Fiqh. The whole process in Usul al-Fiqh, in Bab al-Hujjaj, the book of Hujjaj, is this. I don't have certainty. I have a way to reach the reality, but I don't have certainty in reality. But I have certainty that this way is hujjah. It's enough for me. So God can ask me why you didn't. So that the person who doesn't believe in Khabar Wāḥid definitely would change many of the very famous or common views.
Can you give you one example?
Many examples.
Okay, so 2 examples.
For example, the majority of the fuqaha, they believe that wudu and tayammum and ghusl, you need, it's ibadah. I don't believe that it's ibadah. So for example, if someone, he didn't know anything about ghusl al-janaba, already he's going to shower himself every day or every 2 days. In this case, he already did ghusl al-janaba because there is no need for niyyah.
Okay, and the niyyah is based on Khabar Wāḥid.
Yeah, Khabar Wāḥid or on ijma' sometimes.
So on this basis, the person wouldn't be required to have, because many of sometimes say if you didn't have ghusl al-janaba right on your
this is the result of this difference between this view and my view.
And any other example, which do you think?
Another example. For example, if الشهادة الثالثة لأمير أشهد أن عليا ولي الله. I don't believe that it is mustahab or wajib or it's part of adhan and iqamah, because they used akhbar al-ahad to prove this idea.
Yeah.
Some of them, they had critiqued this akhbar. They said it's not reliable, but some of them, they accept all these riwayat. But I believe these akhbar ahad. And because of this, I can't say that ashhadu anna Ali waliyullah is part, or it is mustahab in azan and iqam.
It's all based on Khabar Wāḥid. Yeah. Interesting, I think, yeah. Another question on the basis of similar impact of theology on the hadith. So, we see that on the notion of gender, we see, so for example, all these Riwāya, all these imams, they are men. And even in Shaykh Aduzi, they say that he only gives 2 pages to women companions with just 38 names. So we see these biases about these narrators, narrations and all. Very less work has been done on reporting about who are these women narrators. How do you think, first of all, why is, I think we know why it is the case, but I still want to know your opinion that why such a big difference, and how do you think it impacts the hadiths that we have, because we have really less women narrators?
Regarding the first question, I think it's very, very reasonable, because women at that time, they didn't care about learning, and if they want to learn anything about their religion, they will ask their husbands or their father or their brothers or something like that. But we don't find any groups or real movement at that time that women wants to start Hawza to learn Sharia.
Why do you think was the case? Because Islam has said that knowledge is obligatory for both men and women.
I think there is a social reason.
Social reasons. The patriarchy, you mean?
Yeah, that's it. So I can understand that why we don't have a lot of women as narrators.
That would have also impacted, as my second part, the hadith that
So the impact, yes, maybe if we have a lot of narrators, women, maybe we can find some new kind of questions. Maybe we can find some topics. So, for example, if I go to some riwayas that critique a woman, they have half of the mind or something like that. All the narrators are men. Maybe if we have such a movement at that time between women, so maybe they tried to ask the Imam about these topics.
Okay.
And maybe we will find something different.
You think that the khutbah in the Nahj al-Balagha about women having the half intellect is actually sound in narrations?
So look, Nahj al-Balagha is not some people they thought that Nahj al-Balagha is like a Qur'an, and everything in Nahj al-Balagha is reliable and 100% from Imam Ali. You know, Nahj al-Balagha is not a Hadithi book. And even the author, who is al-Sharif al-Radi, he wasn't a muhaddith.
Right.
He was an expert in language, in Arabic language. He tried to find some paragraphs or some words or some sentences from Imam Ali with a very high class in language. So he didn't care about isnad, about sources, about hadith. He focused on language itself. So because of this, many of the riwayat that we have in Nahj al-Balagha, it's just a mursal. You can't find a source for this riwayat. But many of these riwayat, you can find it in the history books, in other hadithi books, and you need to try to find the isnad, the source, and to check. So in this case, I would say not every riwayah you can find in Nahj al-Balagha means that Imam Ali actually said this riwayah.
As we move towards our conclusion, before I ask you a few last questions, is there any hadith that you heard or you read that you like it was a hilarious hadith, like it made you laugh a lot?
There are many hadith. For example, we have a riwayah, a hadith, that someone asked Imam alayhi salam, why we find the sun in the early morning goes fast to the middle of the sky, but before Dhuhr, it goes slowly. He thought that from the beginning of the day till 10 o'clock in the morning, the sun is running fast. But from 10 o'clock till 12 o'clock, it goes slowly. And the Imam said to him, why? So the Imam, it looks like the Imam accept that there is a difference between an early morning and before Dhuhr. And he said, because she or the son asked God, can I pass Dhuhr or not? Or now slowly because she is waiting, or it's waiting or the answer or for the replying from God. So because of this. So it doesn't make sense because sun now in the middle of the sky for you and for someone else in the beginning of the morning.
The same. Oh, just on this, I was also reading this, also made me laugh. It was about one of the donkeys of the Prophet that committed suicide. The hadith of Urwa.
Yeah, and we have a hadith that the donkey of Prophet Muhammad said that my father told me that his father told him that his grandfather told him he was with Noah.
No, yeah, in the news boat.
So now we have isnad from. Look, if you want to find this kind of ahadith that make you laugh, you find in Sunni and Shi'i books a lot. But at the same time, we have really many of the ahadith in Sunni books and Shi'i books that are very good in morality and wisdom So we have to balance ourselves here, not to go with criticism, not to go with accepting everything.
You said in one of your works that the monumental developments in jurisprudence, al-fiqh, and its principles, al-usul, after the Akhbari digression in 13th century, should also not be understated, but we have completely turned our backs to the spiritual and ethical dimensions of religion. The hegemony of fiqh has alienated entire religious discipline and has caused us to imagine, even within the Hawza, that Islam is jurisprudence with simply some marginal side notes about theology and ethics.
In Hawza today, the jurisprudence and the legal theory is the two most important science at the whole Hawza. If you are expert in tafsir al-Qur'an, or in history, or in philosophy, or in theology, you'll not have the authority that the jurists have.
How do you think it's impacting the religion for common people as a whole?
I don't think that the jurisprudence itself has a problem. The problem when you look to everything from this angle, jurisprudence one. So, for example, jurisprudence from the beginning till the end speaks about our body. We don't have any mas'ala in jurisprudence speaks about our souls. Just one mas'ala. قصد القربة في الصلاة or قصد القربة في الحج. When you try to say I'm doing salat for God, seeking God, this is something related to our soul. But the whole jurisprudence speak about our body. Praying, fasting, handshaking, skiing, hearing something, drinking, eating, everything related to our body. When you define religion with jurisprudence, you make religion more
body-centered.
Yeah, body-centered. So we will put the soul aside. So this body-centered stays as a problematic. Understand the Quran. If you go to the Quran, you will find just 500 verses in the Quran about jurisprudence.
Mm-hmm.
But we have thousands of the verses in the Quran doesn't speak about jurisprudence. So it's less than, I would say, 2% take out from 12. But when you make religion as a jurisprudence, you took all these ayat aside and focus on just 500 ayahs. And this is the problem. So I'll give you an example. If you speak about something related to theology, people will ask the marja, the jurist, about your opinion. And if he said, this is dalal, all people will accept. But he isn't an expert necessarily. He isn't an expert in theology. He is an expert in jurisprudence. Maybe he will not have anything in history or in theology or in philosophy.
But you feel common people are having the burden of this approach, because then they're also devoid of the spiritual, moral ethos, and they're being told more about jurisprudence
Today.
And its impact.
Today, yeah, I think it's very important. And I think we need to focus on scholars that they don't necessarily stuck with jurisprudence. I don't say something against jurisprudence. I believe in jurisprudence.
We have a lot of books on jurisprudence.
But I said it's not enough to go with jurisprudence to interpret the religion or to understand the religion, the whole parts of religion.
Then you should go to
everything, the history, to spirituality, philosophy, jurisprudence, morality, all these things together.
As a last question, as a part of Sense, Hawza, I would like to thank you. This has really, I just wanted to continue with it. It has really been an engaging conversation, and I think I've learned a lot, and so most have the viewers, they would have benefited. And now there is this eagerness for me to explore more in this domain and also appreciate the works that different scholars have done. Since it's a Thinking Islam podcast and thinking begins with a question, so I want to ask you, is there any question these days which you are not an answer, but a question that you are thinking about on these days, that's in your mind these days? A question that's bothering you, that is making you think a lot.
These days, I think about what we call a Sunan al-Kawniyya.
What's that?
The rules that, I don't know in English, how can I translate as Sunan al-Kawniyya? So, for example, when we speak that God with believers in a war.
Okay. Over in the war of...
He helps them
in the war.
If you go to the Qur'an, you will find that just the believers will be a winner in maybe in the majority of the wars. But when you go to history, you will find there's no difference between believers and non-believers. They win sometime, they win sometimes. It's similar. So the Sunan al-Kawniyya for me is a very important question nowadays. I need to understand, or I ask this question, how can we understand these sunan that the Quran presents several times in his verses?
Okay, so that the believers will win the war. That's not in the...
For example, God said, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, In tansurullaha yansurukum. If you help God, God will help you in war. And in another verse he said, In yansurukum Allahu fala ghaliba lakum. If God helps you, you'll be winner. 100%. So in this case, how can we understand between the reality and the text?
That's something.
I don't believe that's a problem, but I think it's a question. You need to think more about it.
I think that's a brilliant note.
Yeah, because what happened with the Israelis and thinking about this topic.
Yeah, I think it's a really something to think about for us and also the audiences of Thinking Islam, that if the text says that if you are on the right path, you will always be successful. But why doesn't history go by that line? So on this note, I will again thank you for giving this question and for an amazing conversation. And I hope the audience I have particularly learned, and I hope the audience would have at least gotten a preview into what happens in the world of Hadith. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.